Michael Porter is here. He is a university professor at Harvard. It is a distinction held by only 1% of the faculty. Forbes magazine recently described him as the all-time great strategy guru and the most famous and influential business professor who has ever lived. His ideas on competitive strategy have influenced business people and policymakers around the world. His aim now is to shape the debate about America's competitiveness. Last year, he helped launch Harvard Business School's U.S. Competitiveness Project. Its purpose is to answer one of the most challenging questions America faces today. How do we ensure the United States leads in the global economic arena? I'm pleased to have Michael Porter back at this table. Welcome. It's been a while. It's great to have you here.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Charlie. My pleasure.
Let me just do this one time because, as you know, I've referenced this with you before. It seems to me that it would be great to be a university professor for this big reason. First of all, it's a distinction. But secondly, you get to range over all the disciplines on campus, right?
And I do.
Yeah. So you could teach in whatever school you wanted to.
Well, I actually do teach in the medical school,
Right.
the School of Public Health, the Kennedy
Right.
School of Government, and the business school. And it's the best perch that one could ever imagine.
I want you to give me 2 minutes, because you think about this a lot, on health care in America.
Well, I think we first need to understand that the kind of problem of healthcare today is not the problem we've been debating for the last 20 or 30 years. The problem we've been debating is insurance, how to get more people covered, how to get more people in the system. That's an important problem. It's a fundamental problem. But ultimately, going forward, the problem is how can we get more value for the money we are spending on healthcare? That becomes, I think, the critical issue now. We've got to improve the outcomes that we achieve for the money we're spending. We've got to find a way to deliver those excellent outcomes more efficiently. And that will require a restructuring of revolutionary proportions in how we organize healthcare organizations, how we actually deliver care, how doctors and nurses work together.
What's revolutionary?
Well, healthcare historically has been a very siloed field. It's a field that's organized around specialties, medical specialties. Urology, cardiac surgery, and so forth and so on. Healthcare is organized around the supply of these specialty services. The patient then is the ping pong ball that moves from service to service. Each service sees itself as a standalone department or standalone entity. But what we understand is if we want to deliver value, it's not the individual service that matters. It's the collective set of services required to deal with the patient's medical problem. So if you're a diabetic, you need an endocrinologist. You need somebody that can educate you about how to manage your disease. You need to worry about your eyes. You need to worry about your veins. You need to worry about all kinds of issues, and you need a team to work as a team to manage you through that process. But ultimately, healthcare fails the most basic test of organization, and that is it's not organized around the needs of the patient. It's organized around the supply of the services. And until we make that fundamental transformation, we are hobbled in our ability to actually so-called bend that cost curve, as people say.
And if we don't do that, we'll never deal with the deficit in America or the debt.
The healthcare is it's not the 900-pound gorilla. It's the 9 million-pound gorilla. It truly will dominate our future budget problems, and that is one of the points that I don't think is recognized well enough in all this debate.
But we just had a huge debate about healthcare reform during the first several years of the Obama administration. Why didn't they deal? They dealt with access.
They dealt with access,
but did not deal with cost containment or even restructuring.
Right.
Is it too much to bite off at one time?
I can only assume that's why. I mean, it was fundamentally the reform of the insurance system, and many of the reforms were good, and so we need to give full credit there. But it was not didn't go far enough in really thinking about how we were going to restructure the delivery of care and how we were going to create primary care structures that were also able to prevent disease. Because one of the problems we have in healthcare is we've got a lot of preventable things that are really driving the cost up at a very high rate. And we haven't cracked the code of how to do that. The best work on prevention now is actually in the corporate sector. Companies understand that if their employees are sick, don't show up for work, and get expensive illness, that's really expensive to the company. So despite the rhetoric I hear sometimes, thank God the employers are still in the healthcare system, because the most progress we're making on health and wellness is actually in employers, because they have those people come to work every day. They ask them to go through, kind of health checks, and do preventative activity. They give out pedometers so that people walk a lot and have contests on who walked the most miles during the day. All that kind of stuff sounds a little bit hokey.
And even providing places for naps and a whole range of other things.
Exactly, and it's working, and it's working. And so the cost curve is bending in the employer sector, where you have these on-site services and on-site health and wellness programs. But we haven't been able to find a way to spread that mindset and that approach more broadly. Now, I think now some things are kicking in that are promising. We're starting to see a move towards changing the reimbursement model, where you don't get paid to do your office visit or your particular surgery. You're now getting paid for providing the whole, what we call the bundle of services. Or you're getting paid to take care of this patient's total health needs, and so you have an incentive to worry about that total patient problem. So this is starting to change, and it's starting to take off. And I would say in the last 2 years, and we must give some credit to the reform process, there's been more openness to real restructuring than I have seen in my time working in the field.
So Harvard has put together, the Harvard Business School, special report, Reinventing America, while the world needs the U.S. to bounce back. I'll talk about the specifics of that, but why did the Harvard Business School undertake this project?
Well, Charlie, I think that, first of all, I think we as an institution have missed an opportunity to engage in the most important issues, facing business and in society historically. We've tended to do our thing. We teach wonderful courses, we write articles and books and do our thing, but
you send people out into the society to make money and create products and
hopefully do good things. But we as an institution have an enormous alumni base. We have a tremendous pool of faculty and talent, and we decided with the support of our dean to really take this issue on, because we became deeply disturbed about the path that the U.S. economy was on. We were seeing things going on in the U.S. economy that we have not experienced in this country for decades, many decades. You could argue even going back to World War II. Things like the sputtering of the job creation machine. I mean, if you look from 1970 to the year 2000, we would create on average, smoothing out the ups and downs, 2.1% job growth every year after year, decade after decade. Around 2000, 2001, that just stopped. And of course now when the recession hit in 2007, it went negative. But the job generation machine had started slowing down even before 2007. Our workforce participation started falling. The proportion of Americans of working age who are actually employed in the workforce in gainful employment today, at this moment, is at a 30-year low. So our wages weren't growing. And the great American dream, the mobility, the ability to have a good middle-class job and rise up, was sputtering. And we were concerned that we really needed to go and take a look at this issue using all the resources of the school. Was it because the world had changed and we hadn't? I think it's a big part. The world caught up with us, and we no longer had certain advantages. That is probably the biggest part of the problem. The rest of the world, let's go back 20 or 30 years. The rest of the world was way behind, partly because they were still recovering from World War II, partly because we had this commanding lead in so many areas. The rest of the world has been steadily chipping away at improving their competitiveness, improving their skills, improving their infrastructure, reducing corruption, lowering bureaucracy, lowering their taxes. And the U.S., for a variety of reasons, we just have not been progressing as rapidly. We've retained a lot of our core strengths, things like our university system, things like our entrepreneurial culture, but we've now piled on to those strengths a whole set of cost of doing business that really have kind of thrown the balance in the favor of moving activities outside the U.S. and also the inability to support those rising wages. So things like the legal system, things like the regulatory costs, they don't seem like a big deal individually, but when you add them all up, you now start to see that more and more of the kind of middle class work that used to be done here that doesn't require, a Harvard MBA or a PhD in electrical engineering. A lot of that middle class work that used to be done here, we started losing more and more.
Providing a manufacturing base as well as the core of our society.
Core of our society. We, our society was unique.
The great middle class.
This great middle class that was able to succeed and that had a sense of mobility. Right. The ability for a person to kind of move up the ladder from a limited background today is harder than it's been in decades, many decades, because the bar has been
And
rising.
the interesting thing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, if you look at emerging nations, the most important thing that has changed is that they are creating a middle class that has demands of its own, that requires products and services that fuel an economy.
That's exactly right. And what's happened with us is our higher skilled, high income people have generally done pretty well, but everybody else has been stagnant or even declining. At a time when the pressure to pay more of the healthcare costs and so forth has been building as well. So this. To me, this is the big story of the whole age of America. I mean, this story of can we restore the vitality of our economy? Can we restore the competitiveness of our economy so that we can start to restart that middle class prosperity engine? That is the big story.
I want to talk about your ideas, but I want to take note of the fact that this says why the world needs the U.S. to bounce back.
Yes.
Because?
Because the U.S. has been, despite our, lapses and confusion, the U.S. has been the champion of the free market economy. The U.S. has been the champion of reducing protection and eliminating distortion and even promoting workers' rights and protecting intellectual property. We have been really the driving force behind the world economy that we find ourselves in today, that's by and large allowed a lot of countries to raise their standard of living. Without a strong U.S., without a vital U.S. economy, our influence, our ability to continue that role is diminishing. And so I would say that this issue of U.S. competitiveness is not just the U.S. #1 economic issue. It's our #1 foreign policy issue. It's going to determine our influence in the world and our ability to kind of shape the international dialogue.
This is The Economist every year at the end of a year, 2012. They put together a forecast for 2013. Guess what was in it here? What Washington must do now, an 8-point plan to restore American competitiveness. We're going to touch on the 8 points, which I have here, and they're obvious. But what we'll find also is that it clearly looks like the people who write the speeches for the president and the people who help him look at his agenda for the next 4 years have read some of these ideas.
Yes.
Any feedback from the White House about this?
We have lots of contact with lots of different people. We've been very deeply connected with the President's Jobs Council.
Right.
We have a lot of alignment with Jeff Immelt and his colleagues on the
school guy and all that. Yeah.
My former student, I'm proud to say. And so there's been a lot of crosstalk in Gene Sperling and the economic team. So I think that our commitment at the school was to engage with everybody in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way on this issue. So over the last couple of years, we've talked to literally thousands of business leaders, as well as all the relevant constituencies in Washington. Hopefully, we're having an impact.
As you know, there's a debate in Washington. It has to do between revenues and spending and entitlement cuts and all that kind of questions. And one of the questions that arise when they talk about spending is how do you determine what is simply spending and what is more than spending? It's an investment, and it's an investment in the future, and it's an investment that makes you more competitive and ensures you have a future.
Right. And that's a fundamental distinction. In fact, I'm smiling because I remember I used to go to the Renaissance weekend down in Hilton Head and with Bill Clinton, and I remember playing golf with him on New Year's morning. We did that every year for 4 or 5 years in a row, and we had this very conversation about investment versus spending and what's investment versus spending, and of course every person will define what they want as investment.
Right.
Okay. But I do think that the data is quite compelling and shows quite clearly that the things that we really know are investment that shape our future competitiveness.
What does competitiveness mean to you?
This is a fundamental question, because what we've encountered is lots of people thinking about competitiveness in very different ways. When we talk about competitiveness, we think the right way to think about competitiveness is that a nation like the U.S. is competitive if two things happen. One, businesses operating in that location can compete successfully in the international marketplace. But two, while maintaining or improving the standard of living for the average citizen. So what that means is if businesses are doing well, but workers' wages are going down and they're losing their jobs, we're not competitive. If workers are somehow doing great, which doesn't seem possible right now that would ever happen, but it has happened in our history. If workers are doing well, but businesses can no longer compete successfully, we're not competitive. You've got to do those two things together, and the only way to do that is to create a very productive environment for doing business. Because if you can be productive, you can compete, but you can also pay a good wage. And that is the iron law of the marketplace. And what's happened is that the American environment, business environment, has eroded to the point where I think we are losing some of that competitiveness, and that has led to the consequences we talked about earlier.
Okay, so you got an 8-point plan here to restore American competitiveness. Item 1, ease the immigration of highly skilled individuals, starting with international graduates of American universities. You're not the first person to talk about this.
This is, again, every one of these 8 points, Charlie, are pretty much agreed to by almost everybody.
And in fact, you said an interesting thing. When some people look at this and say, well, we've heard this before, you say that's a compliment.
That's a compliment, absolutely. And that means that we have wide agreement among lots of different people on the left and on the right and in the academic community about doing these things. And our point is, okay, we've got to do them.
Right. Because
if we don't do them, and the reason we picked these 8 points, and that being one, is that each of them addresses centrally one of the real serious weaknesses that has emerged from all this research we've done about U.S. competitiveness. So why do we put ease high-skilled immigration? Because we have a sort of a critical shortage of certain kinds of highly skilled and highly trained people in engineering and science and math and other areas. We are educating many of these people in our own universities. They would like to stay in America.
Right.
And they're actually being asked to go home. And that's not a solution to our fundamental problem of skills in America. We have a lot other things to do. But in terms of something that would move the needle relatively quickly and start to affect our competitiveness quite quickly, this is something that we can do.
All right, point 2, simplify the corporate tax code with lower statutory rates and no loopholes. So in other words, this is a grand bargain. What we'll do is we'll lower the corporate rates, but at the same time we'll eliminate the deductions.
The deductions that have grown up over many decades in special deals with special industries and so forth. Yeah, the U.S. now has the highest corporate tax rate in the OECD. We used to have the second highest. Japan actually lowered theirs.
Yeah. And the consequences of that are capital seeks lower tax rates?
The consequences are on the margin. A business decides where they're going to put a major activity and major jobs, and they're going to put that activity where the net to them is
does
good.
Big business want a lower corporate rate, or they want all these deductions that benefit them that they know how to advantage?
For the first time ever in the history of the Harvard Business School, we surveyed all of our alumni. Can you believe it? We hadn't used this asset.
Right.
We did it for the second time, and there's overwhelming consensus in business that we should lower the corporate rate and the loopholes. So And that's business leaders who are more liberal, business leaders who are more conservative. Everybody, 90% says that's a great deal. It's time to do that now. So that would have in fact, we also surveyed in the most recent survey, which was last fall, we surveyed a sample of the general public. And you know what? The general public of all these things that we recommended, the general public's favorite thing was reduce the corporate tax rate and eliminate the loopholes.
Okay, but at the same time, are those people who are, especially the wealthy individuals, okay with the fact, that the president and Warren Buffett and other famous people have come on board to the idea of a higher tax rate for people who make more than, take your number, 250,000 or 400,000?
Yeah. Well, I think we found in our survey, actually, we put in there the so-called Buffett rule, which says that if you earn, in that case, more than $1 million, you have to pay at least 30% in taxes.
That is a minimum tax rate.
That's minimum tax rate for very high income people. That was not widely supported in business. But because I think people feel that, okay, well, what if what if it's all investment income? What if? So I think people think that's too simplistic. But I think the idea that we should bring down the corporate tax rate and eliminate the loopholes, that's a good deal. I think. Talking informally with many business leaders, I think the idea that the Bush tax cuts could expire, and we could go back to the Clinton rates.
Right.
I think my personal view, and I work with a lot of business leaders, is that there was willingness to do that. I think the big hang-up has been, okay, yes, we'll do that, but we have to control spending. Right. Because if we don't control spending, we're just going to be back at the table again.
But they do consider raising taxes. I mean, when you talk about eliminating those tax rates, they define that as raising taxes.
They define that as raising taxes. And I think there's now a growing groundswell that there should be a limit on deductions, personal deductions.
Right. Well, not only that, they suggest in some cases putting deductions that have become sacrosanct in America on the table.
And I think we should. And they need to be means tested at very least. And we just got in. So I think we got into a rhythm here, which I think people are now willing to revert to a much better structure.
Right. I want to go through again. Remember what we're doing here. We're talking about ways that America can be more competitive and satisfy the world as well as its own self and save itself. One, again, immigration. 2, simplify the corporate tax code. 3, create an international tax system for American multinationals that tax overseas profits only where they are earned, consistent with practices in other leading countries.
This one has been controversial. And here, with respect, I would say that the president has talked about this in a way that has been a little confusing.
Right.
The idea here is this. Most countries, if you have a multinational company, it has locations around the world. And if it has a German subsidiary, it pays German taxes. And then the money after taxes, it can pass that money back to Sweden if that's where its headquarters are. And there's no additional tax. Mm-hmm. You pay taxes where the money's earned. The U.S. system is an outlier. Our system is, okay, yes, you pay your German taxes, but if your German tax rate happened to be lower than our American tax rate, remember, the highest in the world, you have to sort of top it up. So you have to pay us taxes on the difference. Mm-hmm. And that is, not a recipe to encourage companies to repatriate their profits to the U.S. And so we have this large pile of profit sitting around the world that
they never brought it home because they didn't want to pay taxes.
Because they didn't want to pay. They didn't want to pay the difference.
And there ought to be a means to have them bring it back so they could reinvest it under the best of circumstances.
Absolutely. And but the president has said that there's a tax break for having jobs overseas. And frankly, I just don't understand that. No, there's not a tax break. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. The tax break for sending jobs overseas is because of our tax policy. It's not because of overseas tax policy. So
there you go. Okay, international institutions to address distortions, and abuses in international trading and investment system. That's number 4.
Yeah, we have a high-skill, high innovation, high intellectual property, high service economy. And we still face massive barriers to those things around the world. Intellectual property is not respected. China is Exhibit A. Services trade is impeded by all kinds of rules and distortions. So the U.S. has traditionally been a major force for opening markets and opening trade. But over the last 5 or 6 years, we just stopped. We stopped our leadership. And we believe that the U.S. must re-engage in the international
part of that
trading
is because
system.
of competition in Congress and some labor union objections to fair labor practices at play.
Right. And I agree with, that's exactly right. The point that I think that we all have to remember is we are a relatively open economy. People can already import into America. We have the largest trade deficit in the history of the world, we have had it. These trade agreements are opening those markets. Our market's already open. They almost inevitably benefit us more than they benefit the other countries. And yet we've gotten ideologically tangled in trying to use these agreements to try to get other countries to change their social policies and so forth, and we just have to re-engage. Now, I was very pleased to see the president talking about a trade agreement with Europe. What a smart thing to do. Let's go and open the trade with Europe, and let's create more economic integration. That'll be good for all of us.
5, simplify and streamline regulations affecting business to force on outcomes rather than costly reporting and compliance, delays, and frequent litigation.
Now, the regulatory debate has been flawed in the following way. Regulation isn't that you need to separate regulation into 2 issues. Number one is what standards do you set? For safety, efficiency, energy. And the second is, how do you go about achieving compliance with those standards? Our problem is not too high standards. That's not the problem. Our FDA regulation is no more stringent than the European equivalent of the FDA.
Federal Drug Administration.
Yeah. But the problem we have is the compliance process. We're slow, we're bureaucratic, we inflict massive cost and delay. And so let's separate those 2 issues. Let's all agree on high standards, but let's get it done better. Let's get it done faster. Let's get it done with less bureaucracy. And, and that's going to make us more competitive.
And number 6, enact a multi-year program to improve logistical communications and energy infrastructure, prioritizing those projects most important for reducing the cost of doing business and promoting innovation.
We have this copious evidence that our infrastructure is no longer world class. We've let it deteriorate, and we have trouble mounting a long-term strategy to deal with that. We may need new sources of financing. We may need private-public partnerships. There's some infrastructure bank ideas. There's lots of good ideas here. We all agree on this.
Yeah, but even if we agree on what we should do, we don't agree on how to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And often at the root of the problem is that we've fallen into this horrible habit that we won't allow sort of good things to happen where we agree, because there's something that we care deeply about that we're holding everything up for. I'm super
All right, number 7, agree on a balanced regulatory and reporting framework to guide the responsible development of American shale gas and oil reserves. The idea that we have here, energy reserves, that will enable us not to be energy dependent on the Middle East and other places.
Epic opportunity for America. We've won the lottery.
Right.
We can eliminate or come close to eliminating our need to import energy. Because of the tremendous natural gas resources we have, we can get a 50% carbon benefit by converting from oil to natural gas. We have plenty of gas. Let's get this done. It will allow us to support a lot of industries that have not been competitive in America because we've had relatively high-cost energy. So here's an epic opportunity that will benefit America, but we've been tangled up, again, in a squabble over environment versus economic. Should we allow exports of gas? And we haven't come together around sort of a regime, a federal regime that will give us certainty and allow this to be developed in the long term. Again, it's one of those things that is It's just one of many examples, but that all of these 8 are a little bit like that. But this one is the thing that came sort of out of nowhere. I think we've been seeing all these other things building for some years, and we kind of understand those. But this one came a little bit out of nowhere, and it was American technology. It was innovation.
We found out that we could go places we didn't know. We had the technology to get there, and it was cost feasible.
It was cost feasible, and so that it's a marvelous opportunity for America. Let's get together around that opportunity and move ahead. Everybody agrees.
Number 8, create a sustainable, listen to this, create a sustainable federal budget through a combination of greater revenue, including reducing deductions we've talked about earlier, and less spending through efficiencies in entitlement programs and revised spending priorities, embodying a compromise such as Simpson-Bowles or Rivlin-Domenici.
We had an event.
This is the Washington debate.
This is the Washington debate right now, and again, we had Erskine-Bowles came to Harvard Business School when we had the first big event of our U.S. Competitiveness Project, where we had about 100 CEOs and other leaders from all across the country. And he spoke the evening before the first big seminar session and talked about the whole journey that they'd been on with Simpson-Bowles and talked about the plan and so forth. And, you know, I can tell you that if we had taken a vote that night of these 100 CEOs, it would have been 100 for and 0 against.
But where were they when Simpson-Bowles came out, and even the president didn't support it?
Yep. And this is a great failure on the part of the business community to get behind the kind of steps that all of these 8 things represent. So, you know, I think we're now seeing a different discussion in the business community. I think we're seeing a different point of view in the business community. It's emerging very, very rapidly. I think we hope we've had in some way an influence on that. But I will also tell you, Charlie, that part of what needs to be done in Washington, but we think actually business itself can make an enormous impact on this issue.
Because it can influence Washington, or because it has within its own operations the capacity to change?
Because of the latter. Okay. Because business has a tremendous ability to influence the skills issue. And we have dozens and dozens of examples about companies that are actually transforming the skills situation. Business can affect the supplier base. Business can affect K through 12 education. Business can affect a lot of these things. And business actually has many more resources than government. And but business leaders in this world of the global economy sort of got trapped into what we believe is a bit of the wrong thinking, and that is that since we're a global company, we no longer have to worry about our U.S. communities. Right. And therefore, it's somebody else's job to worry about that. And now we've woken up in the business community, and we've started to understand that if we don't have good skills in our local community, how are we going to find the workers we need? How are we going to find the engineers we need? How are we going to really drive growth in our company? And so I think there's a historic opportunity right now for business and government to actually work together in a more constructive way that I have certainly not seen.
Yeah, but here, I remember once being in a room where Tim Geithner made a speech and talked about spending and the Obama administration's view of things. You know, he said it's about politics in the end.
I would say actually all these issues are actually about economics, and what we've allowed ourselves to do.
That's why I quoted Guyton in case you disagreed.
Yeah, they're fundamentally about economics, and there's an economic truth here, and you know, and there's a reality which is the modern global economy and what it takes to be competitive, and if we can't understand that we have a common interest in getting these things right, politics will destroy us.
But I mean, I think Geithner's right, actually. I mean, I think that you've got to talk common sense, and you've got to develop within the country a political demand on the part of Washington that they do what you might call the right thing.
Yep. I would agree. And what's ironic is, as I told you a minute ago, we surveyed the general public on these 8 points.
Right.
You know what the number one favorite thing of the general public was among the 8?
What?
Corporate tax reform.
Yeah.
They get it. They understand that but somehow that process of getting it at some deep democratic level is not working its way into the votes that are cast.
Yeah. And because it has to go through K Street, in part.
Right. Has to go through K Street. Well said.
Thank you. Michael, good to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
Michael Porter from Harvard Business School and from Harvard University, where he is a university professor. These points you can see in the Harvard Business Review, Reinventing America, Why the World Needs the U.S. to Bounce Back. Thank you, as always. Back in a moment. Stay with us.